Hey, all right, today we are taking the last 100 years of real estate and we're going to look at the most stable markets, what made them stable, and a few numbers to look at and key talking points that we can use to determine whether today's market's stable and why, if it is, why it is, or if it's not, then why it's not. So, all right, I went 100 years back, and the longest stretch of a stable market was actually between 1977 and 2001. There was a couple blips in here, which was the great inflation, which actually was like early 1970s up through early 1980s, but we're not going to touch on that today. Another lesson. That was good. Great inflation. That's coming later. All right. So start at 1977. The numbers that we're looking at here are green is going to be the interest rates. This is the interest rates that were present during these times. This 3.2 and 3.6, this is so your house, let's say that your income, it's your income to home purchase price ratio. So if your income is $50,000, what this means is that most people were buying houses, if they made $50,000, they could buy a house or afford a house that was 3.5 times what their income was. So in this scenario, you do 50 times 3, 150, then you got a half in there, that's 25,000. So you're going to be at 175,000. So this, at a $50,000 income, would have been like a $175,000 house. What we have to take into account, though, is the fact that interest rates are different. So the monthly payment is going to change. On a $175,000 house at 10.5% interest, you might get a very similar payment to what you get at a $250,000 house with only 4% interest. So remember, that's a key point to take into consideration. But what we're getting to here is this market was stable at 3.2 to 3.6 times what people were making is what should have been the home price that they could have afforded. So where this got off the rails was in 2001. It shot all the way up to where in 2007 we actually had a high, and I forgot to write that up there. Let me look at my note. So I've got this all scratched out. That was 5.87. So that number became 5.87. Which means that if someone was approved for $50,000, you take the 50,000 times 5, so now you're getting 250,000, and then you have the 8.7, which is almost basically another full 50,000. So really, we'll call it 300,000. So people were buying homes at 5 times, almost 6 times what their actual annual salary was. So that's where we can see people were buying a little bit ahead of what they could afford. But interest rates, when we were in 2007, were also at 6.34. So they were not low like today. Interest rates was 6.34% on average. So they weren't quite as high as it was back in the 70s to 2001. Interest rates did come down just a little bit in that 2007, but there were some other lending practices that were happening that caused that instability. So what happens is that they were buying so far above what they could actually afford, we ran into an issue. So the market dropped back down in 2007 or 2012, and then this number, this is the number that we're really wanting to watch here. This 3.2 to 3.6 basically is what income you make equal. You take that number and you times it by what you're making in your annual salary. So again, 50,000, 3.5 times, you could afford a $175,000 home. Interest rate is a huge factor here, though. So this is why today, when we go to 2019, the number that we're at is 4.46. So today, if a household is making $50,000, basically you take the 50,000 times 4.46, which is going to be about 250,000. It's going to equal 225,000. About 4.5 is what someone making $50,000 a year can afford. The difference is, though, is that the interest rates right now and why it's okay for this number to be higher and why it's not a great cause for concern is the fact that interest rates right now are below 4.5%. 4.5% is the high average right now. Really, we're about 4%. So that allows, with the interest rate being lower, that allows for this number, that 4.46, basically your household income ratio to your home purchase price. It's okay for it to be higher because the interest rate changes. But these are some numbers that we're wanting to watch. It's something that I definitely always take into consideration. It's something that's going to be very important in the next probably 2 to 5 years. And I'll keep you guys updated if anything changes, if that number goes whack, what could happen or like what could send it off. is let's say interest rates go up back to 8.5%. Well, now if interest rates are at 8.5%, nobody's going to be able to afford to buy a house that's 4.5 times what their annual income is. It's just not going to make sense in a monthly payment. So that's something that could create market volatility. I think the government, society is very aware that that could happen. But remember, when you're raising interest rates, don't panic, because as you can see, there's so many other factors to take into consideration. So please let me know any questions. I know it was a quick lesson today. I'm happy to clear anything up, and I hope you guys learned something. Have a great week.